Good morning. It's Friday, January 3rd, 2020 in Altoona, Iowa. Last night, this conference room hosted another Pete Buttigieg supporter meeting. I stumbled across it about 6:45, meaning it had been going for 45 minutes, and stuck my head in. With luck, I'll put up an iPhone video of what I saw. But I counted 25 supporters, and I didn't recognize any of the people other than the organizer from the Pete Buttigieg meeting I attended and put up in a video in early December. So the Buttigieg people continue to meet weekly. They continue to encourage people to go to caucus training, and I'm sure that's going to pay off. I did read the chapter on the Iowa caucuses in the book, Why Iowa? And I found it very educational. Warning, I majored in political science at the University of Pennsylvania a little over 50 years ago, so I'll try to keep the nerd content down here. But the Iowa caucuses are interesting. They are first in the nation by state law. The Democrats and the Republicans in Iowa cooperate. They both want to be first in the nation. They typically hold their caucuses on the same night. Often the precincts hold the caucus in the same building. No longer are the buildings private homes. They tend to be public buildings. And state law requires that state buildings and public buildings be made available for the caucuses. Notwithstanding these two references to state law, they are entirely private affairs. They are hosted by the private political parties. They are funded by the private political parties. And unlike a primary election, no state or government money is used for the caucuses to occur. The differences between the Republican and Democratic caucuses are profound and easy to cover. A Republican caucus lasts about an hour. You show up, you sign in as a registered Republican, and the first thing that happens is there's a straw vote for your favorite candidate for president. This straw vote is non-binding and literally means nothing other than as a PR event. After this vote occurs, the caucus is suspended. The caucus secretary or chairman calls the state Republican headquarters, reports the number count, the vote count of the straw vote, and then the caucus resumes. All that happens is they elect delegates to the county convention, which will later elect delegates to the congressional district convention, which will later elect delegates to the state convention. That's it. Takes an hour. The Republicans are done. If it is in the same building, the Democrats are really just getting started. Some similarities are that a voter can show up and register for a political party the day of the caucus. In Atlantic, Iowa, Pete Buttigieg started using the term future former Republicans. And that has real meaning in Iowa because a voter can be registered as a Republican and then attend the Democratic caucus and register as a Democrat, participate in the caucus, and then later register as a Republican again. Moreover, any voter who will be eligible to vote in the November 2020 election can participate in the caucuses. This includes 17-year-olds. It includes people who just turned 17 but will turn 18 before the November election date. Obviously, it's the Democratic caucuses that are of interest here. So here are the rules. After you show up and sign in, the caucus cannot start before 30 minutes have passed. After 30 minutes, a count is given. This count is extremely important. And in large caucus turnouts, as voters sign in, they are given a card with a number on it. So you might be number 213 and your friend might be number 345. But the precinct chairman, the temporary chairman, who then may be elected chairman for that night, whoever it is who's running the meeting, has to know the total number of caucus participants present because of the viability threshold. For a candidate to be allowed any delegates, that candidate must have 15% of the vote. And they can't know what the 15% goal is unless they know the total number of caucus attendees. Large caucus turnouts can number 500 or more, so it is very important to have this number correct. Once the number is announced and the viability threshold is announced, there is a 30-minute voting session. And the voting is not done by paper. You go stand with a group who supports a particular candidate. Notice this is not a secret ballot. It's very public. At the end of 30 minutes, the number of caucus participants who are supporting a particular candidate is tallied. Any candidate who gets over 15% of the total is a viable candidate. Any candidate who gets less than 15% of the total is not a viable candidate. It takes a while to tally all this up. And by the way, these first round results, and there are 2 rounds in total, these first round results are not reported nationally or statewide. No one ever really knows what they were. After this, there's a second round of voting called a realignment period. During this period, any voter who was supporting a candidate who failed to meet the viability threshold can vote for someone else. And incidentally, anyone who voted for a particular candidate the first go-round can move to a different candidate if he or she chooses. A caucus attendee who is what would be called a sincere voter and is voting for the person they sincerely prefer to be the presidential candidate, who fails to support a candidate who gets 15% of the total vote, has 4 choices. One of them is just to go home, and that happens. It happens as a matter of political choice. Another is to join a viable candidates group. So if you're a supporter of Marianne Williamson and your second choice is Bernie Sanders, then you go over and stand in the Bernie Sanders group. A third choice is for your non-viable group to move en masse to another candidate, perhaps a non-viable candidate, in order to give that non-viable candidate enough of a body count to become a viable candidate. So in this case, Marianne Williamson's supporters may choose to combine forces with Tom Steyer's supporters, and that might make Tom Steyer a viable candidate. And as you can see, once this happens and it becomes clear that candidate X is now viable, people who are supporting candidate Y or Z can go over and move and support candidate X. Sometimes deals are done in advance of the caucuses between political candidates. So they agree that if anywhere in Iowa both of them are non-viable, one will move to the other. And how that's worked out doesn't really matter. The point is that pre-caucus deals like that are done. And the final alternative for a non-viable caucus goer is to try to support other people to come over and support that particular candidate. So a Marianne Williamson supporter may go to John Delaney's supporter and say, come on over, support her, she'll be viable if you help. There are 30 minutes in this realignment period. At the end of the 30 minutes, the voting is closed and persons are counted. If there remain non-viable candidates, the caucus attendees who are supporting that non-viable candidate have one last minute chance to go align themselves with a viable candidate so that their vote counts. What is reported to the state party is not the raw vote count Pete Buttigieg had 236 delegates. Joe Biden had 212 delegates. Elizabeth Warren had 108 delegates, etc. What happens is the precinct has a certain number of delegates to the county convention. State and national Democratic Party law require that there be proportional representation. So, if Pete Buttigieg's 236 delegates results in 41% of the total vote, then he will get 41% of the delegates. However, there are no fractional delegates, so there is rounding involved. Because there's no rounding involved, this can lead to a distortion of the results. The example given in why Iowa involved the 2008 caucuses, where Barack Obama got 55% of the vote, Hillary Clinton got substantially less, and John Edwards got substantially less. Obama ended up with 50% of the delegates from that particular caucus, and Clinton and Edwards ended up with the same number of delegates. It was 4 for Obama and 2 for Clinton and 2 for Edwards because of rounding. That particular precinct had 8 delegates to the next convention, which was the county convention. For what it's worth, a quick pros and cons. First, the bad. You have to show up in person. If you're a Democrat, it's going to take 2 to 2.5, possibly even 3 hours. It might be cold. It will be dark. If you have children, good luck with childcare. When you vote, it's in public. There is no secret ballot. As a result, turnout can be low. People just stay home. Next, the good. The caucuses are held now in public buildings usually, not private homes. You can register for a caucus on the day of the caucus. You're not bound by your party affiliation. You can vote your heart. You can be a sincere voter. You can show up at the caucus and vote for Marianne Williamson, or for John Delaney, or for Andrew Yang, even though you know in your heart that person will not be the Democratic nominee for president. But you can register where your feelings are, where your intellect is, and perhaps you'll have a viable candidate and get a delegate or 2 or 3 to the next convention, the county convention. There is a second round of voting, second chance voting. There you can become a strategic voter. If Marianne Williamson doesn't get enough votes to be viable, and you think that Joe Biden has a better chance of beating Donald Trump than does Bernie Sanders, then you can go support Joe Biden. Or vice versa. You can go support Bernie Sanders. So you get a chance to vote your heart, and you get a chance to vote your mind. What they do for the national party is they weed out the field. Unfortunately, the results of the first round of caucus voting are not reported at all anywhere. So, given that people are voting as sincere voters generally in the first round, we never learn what the results were. It is that second round where they can become strategic voters that is reported. Is this helpful to the later primary states? You bet it is. Some of the weaker candidates or the candidates without broad appeal stop after Iowa, or perhaps after Iowa and New Hampshire. Anyway, that's how the Democratic caucuses work. That's why a group like Pete Buttigieg meets weekly to recruit canvassers, to have people go to caucus training. Supporters of Pete Buttigieg need to understand how this works. Supporters of any candidate need to understand how this works. And I'm thankful to the book, Why Iowa, which explains it. By the way, the lead author of the book, David Redlofsk, who I met in Grinnell when we both attended a Governor Steve Bullock event, was the precinct chairman in Iowa City, home of the University of Iowa, in the 2008 caucuses. And he reports at some length in the book about what happened. and it's interesting reading. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you like this political content, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching.